My name's Francis Briers, sometimes known as the Rev, and I'm here to offer a spiritual response to life's questions. So I'm doing a series at the moment on relationships. I started with self-relationship, self-love, our relationship with ourselves, and then I've started to move on to our relationships with others. I've done one video about our relationships with others, and this next one is about difference. So the reason I'm doing these videos about relationships is because I get so many questions about it. And something I often see, and I've had a number of emails about it, is that people are talking about how them and their partner are so different, how can it ever work? And I find that fascinating because many of us end up in relationships with people who on some level are profoundly different to us. My wife and I are in lots of ways very similar, have a very similar set of ideals and values, and work in similar fields and have lots in common. There are definitely ways that we're profoundly different people. And I see that in a lot of relationships. Even with couples who are very similar, there will be these sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle differences. And in some couples, it's the difference that is part of what makes the couple work. And yet those differences can be really challenging for us. So something that feels key to me about how we hold difference in our relationships, and this applies to one-to-one relationships, but it can also apply on a much larger scale. In some ways, archetypally, I think this is a big part of what goes on in the differences between faiths, between religions, is that if you take someone's difference and make them wrong for being different, judge them as being somehow at fault for being different than you, then you've got a problem. And I think that happens a lot. In a way, perhaps subtly. I think that assessment of someone else as wrong because they're different contains a core of strong arrogance, because it assumes that I'm right for being how I am. And goes even further than that and says, not only am I right for being how I am, but you're wrong for being different than me. So while it's a common pattern of thought, and in some ways labelling it as arrogant may be uncomfortable because you might recognise it in yourself, that pattern of thought of thinking, well, they're different, they do it differently and the way they do it is wrong. Because it happens subtly in all sorts of ways, from when we look at the way someone else does their work compared with us, like I say, right through to the grand scale of religious war is founded on that same concept. We're right, that means they're wrong, and therefore we must eradicate them or change them. They've either got to change or they've got to go away, because I can't stand to live with that tension. And then right down to the small scale, sometimes small scale, sometimes slightly larger, but the small scale of our one-to-one relationships, maybe our loving relationships or friendships, of looking at the way that someone is different from us. That I might look at someone the way my wife is different from me and go, why does she do it that way? That's wrong, she needs to do it the way I do it. So one pattern I've noticed in my relationships is that I'm slow. My pace is slow. And other people that I am in relationship with, my wife for instance, have a fast pace. And that can create all sorts of small conflicts that can become large conflicts. She often gets to things before I do, and will then get frustrated that I didn't do the job. But then I get frustrated because I was going to do that job, I just hadn't got there yet. So we can end up both frustrated with each other, both thinking that the other person has acted in a way that hasn't worked for us, and that can swiftly become a kind of battle of criticism if we don't manage it carefully. So I'd invite you to look at the differences between you and the significant people in your life and consider how this might apply for you on a larger scale, maybe in work, maybe in your spirituality or faith. Really look at where this subtle arrogance might turn up in you, because it turns up in most of us. And not for the sake of giving yourself a hard time or beating yourself over the head about it, but actually just looking at how can you embrace humility more? Real deep humility of acknowledging that they're different from me and that's okay. And how do we meet in that difference? There's a wonderful thought or question that I came across with a teacher called Andrew Holmes, who teaches 5 Rhythms dance. He would ask the question again and again, who are you and how do we meet? Who are you and how do we meet? And that quality of humble curiosity, deep fascination and curiosity in relationship, for me has something very rich in every single moment in life. You know, in psychology it's sometimes talked about as a typological difference. So that stops it being an assessment of you being wrong for being different from me, and makes it an assessment of that actually constitutionally at your core there's some way in which you're different. And when I frame it like that, sometimes that helps me to get curious. What is the typological difference that's going on here? How are they doing things? And how is that working for them? And why is that different from me? And could that work better for me? Or does that insight help us have a better relationship? So consider in your life, consider with the people in your life, what are the typological differences? And how might you be able to work better with them? At the heart of it, can you meet the world and every person in it, and again and again and again, ask that question? Hello, who are you and how do we meet? Can you really relinquish that kind of essential arrogance, essential and subtle arrogance that so easily creeps up on us, and instead embrace a deep, loving humility? I hope that stimulates some interesting thought in you, and maybe, hopefully, it may improve your relationships. As ever, I offer these reflections with love.